Hello and welcome back everyone to quite a rare site, and that is actually that we are doing a tutorial, a small one. So today we will talk signals, and for that I have prepared a few things, a few stations, a yard and mainline and sideline switches. So me from the cutting, I just want to give you a small tip before we actually start. When we go to a signal and you see the mouse, if I'm on the right side of the track, the signal is on the right side, and if I go on the other side, it jumps over. Especially for signals that are set on a given side, it works. And also if it's set on the middle, you can see it here. The arrow goes towards the top right, and then when I go with the mouse onto the other direction, it goes to the bottom left. So depending on your cursor, you can place down signals, and you don't need to do it via your keyboard and shift, switching direction, but you can do it depending on what side your cursor is on of the track. And now let's continue with the video. So let's start with the absolute basics in signaling, because it was asked here and there, sometimes in the comments. And I think I wanted to try to create a new help, let's say it like that. So let's jump right into it. We will start with junctions. I want to keep this relatively short and compact. I will use the one-way markers to show you where the trains are supposed to run. This is mostly theoretical, but we start with the standard mainline to mainline switch. There can be different sets of switches, so you can just pull these two tracks through and have them parallel run in, or have them all run into the first track and then down to the second track. Now you know me, I like to keep my main line unregulated so that the trains itself keep a good distance to each other. So when a higher speed train is running into a lower speed train, the higher speed train will slow down and stay behind the slower speed train in areas that are not signaled. How to achieve areas that are not signaled? You take this block belize, and what it does is when I put a signal, for example here, you can see that it kills the view range. So this purple is the view range. It kills the view range of the signal itself. So that is what I always use when we are leaving a junction. So when we get back to open track, so in this case, for example, it would be placed here, here and here. So because we have right-hand traffic always on the tracks that are leaving the junction. Then very, very simple, because we're going into a junction, we want to see something. We put in a signal, and here it will check this entire area that is marked here, because the train can only go onto the right track because it's right-hand drive. It won't check this lower area. Okay, it will check this lower area, but it never will interfere with that. So even if a train arrives from the left side and stays on this lower track, for example, then it won't be seen. So when we have a train passing the signal and it's inside this purple marker but going straight ahead, and with a train coming from here that wants to go to the left, they won't touch. So the areas they reserve, they won't touch. So when we do that everywhere, like this is the basic signaling on how a junction like this would look like. Now, how do we do that in a single track configuration? The easiest answer, to be very, very honest, is you don't, because you keep it up to the stations to do the signaling. What you can do in theory is you want to prevent using block balizes. You just put in signals, like this for example, and then the trains do the work themselves. When there's a station down the line, so let me just pretend that we have a station here. It's a 2-track station, we have the switch there, and then you have a signal here, a block balize here. Then these signals on this side, so let's choose the upper one, it will only go towards the block balize. This one down here will also only go towards the block balize. So it will reserve the entire area between the signal and this balize. When we have a track passing through this signal, it will check the area between the signal and the next signal. That is the only issue when you do it like that. This signal doesn't look into the junction itself. What it can do though is that when they have a train departing here and it goes straight, to be honest, there's no advantage. I just wanted to play around with you because the issue is maybe you just already thought, what am I telling you? Exactly. You have the station. And then the train runs in here, and I mean, it's checked from the other side as well. The issue is when you do it like this, it can, in theory, gridlock your traffic because you will have a train waiting here, you will have a train waiting there, and maybe even there. Then it's gridlocked, and then you can't do anything about it. So you can have it at the signals, but if you want to take the risk, you can also place them closer to the junction, but I generally don't advise it. For example, when we go here, and then there's a junction, sorry, not a junction, a station. And then like this, especially when they are very close, and you just put it in like this, and then you have the station here, the train wants to depart from the station, and then it can check this entire area in between for reservations, and when there is no reservation, it goes. That's generally the little bit easier part. Then also the tip that we have in here, when you are switching from a double track layout to a single track layout, you can do it like this. Super simple, signal and balise. But what you can also do is you leave the balise away. What that does, for example, down here now, when I showed to you when I choose the right signal, it will look into the second track. So when it goes, for example, back to single track here, I just built it like that and I put a signal there. Then you choose this one, it goes all the way there to this next signal. And then you have a meeting place in between these two signals for trains to arrive from each direction. And that way you have already created a station on a single track. Super easy stuff. You can, in theory, add the balise. The only good part about this is that you can have then, in theory, 2 trains in between the balise and the next signal, or even more. Depending on how many you can fit inside of it, they will go in and in and in. So you can unrealistically fill up the area between the balise and the signal with a lot of trains, because after the balise, as we already learned, trains check for themselves. Now, next scenario, main line to single line. Also very simple again. I mark it with the arrows because we want to keep the main line unregulated. I put in the balises, I put in the normal signals. And now you may think, okay, how do we do that? There are 2 options. Option number 1 is you put it right next to the main line. That way the train will only arrive when it arrives at the main line, then it will check for this area. When you do it like down here and you put it at the next station, and the station is 20 kilometers away, it will pass this first signal. And then for the 20 kilometers it needs to get to the junction, it is blocking the junction itself. So in theory, the theory is quite harsh there, but once it passes a signal towards the junction, it reserves the entire junction for itself, at least the tracks that it needs. So it makes sense to put it close to the junction towards the main line, because that way it can run these, for example, 20 kilometers like from the last example, and then arrive at this signal and then check if it can go onto the main line or not, because otherwise it will block a lot of trains. Next example, main line ending in a single track line. This is very, very rare that this actually happens. And here it's basically the same. When the stations, so standard main line, balise and entry signal, when the stations are very far away, it makes sense to put the signals in like this, so that you just cover the junction part. But when you have a double track passing loop, for example, or a station close by, it makes sense to put these signals far away, not far away, but further away towards the station. That, of course, again, makes the area that needs to be checked for reservations bigger. And the question is, do you want that? You can do that, of course, but the perk of putting it closer to the junction itself is that you make this area smaller. The downside is you are a little bit less likely to have everything running smooth, but that's just a small percentage when you set it up absolutely crazy. When you have a passing loop behind it and you set it up like this again, so standard go over, I will put in the balise just to mark an open end. We have the signal and it checks behind the signal as well. And when we have a train arriving from the other direction, it can only check to the next signal. So when your schedule has trains coming from the other direction, it doesn't make any sense to have signal there. Then you only want to have signal back here, because then you can see it will check the entire area. But again, if you need it closer to the junction, you will lose the ability to check behind the junction, but you will also make the area smaller that needs to be checked. Then, when we already have the normal mainline parts done, let's go to stations. And these are only the normal stations that I have chosen. There are a few more special kinds of stations. We will discuss that in the yard part. But let's start at the standard mainline. What you always want is you want to have an entry. So entry and exit, balise and signal. Now for the fast trains you want the checking, so the path checking, to go all the way through. So we are not placing another signal here in front of the second switch, because you want the trains to enter or to pass the signal. And if a train is sitting in the station itself and the train arriving is passing the station, it won't do the check on the platform, it will only do the check on the track itself, pass by. And for the train though that is sitting in the station, then when you do overtakes, you don't want the train to pass this signal here and block the entire purple pink area. You don't want that. So you put a second signal here, because that way when a regional train arrives that has to stop at the station, it passes the signal, it goes up into the branch, stays in here, and then it has a bit of space that it needs to drive, and then it hits the next signal to check for this junction. If you now have a high-speed train arriving, it will only check the track in the middle if it's clear or blocked, so it won't even see the regional train on the platform, it will pass by. And once the high-speed train is in between this signal and the balise on the other side, the regional train will get every time a red signal here and has to wait for the intercity to pass. You can play with that, move them further out, or keep them relatively close, however you need it for your intercities and regional trains to work. Now, if you have the same thing but with a single track, again we do the right-handed drive inside of the station itself. This is a passing loop basically on a single track, so arriving with a single track, going up and down. The only important part you need to know, as we already discussed it, you need to put signals here. Trains arriving from the left will only, due to the one-way signal in the station, check the lower platform, not the upper platform. So trains arriving from the left will only check the lower platform. If you want to have two trains in the platform, for example, you need to put a balise in front of it. That way the check is done. So the check is not relevant what's on the platform. That's what I wanted to say. So when you have a train sitting on the platform and you don't have the balise, the other train will be stuck at the last signal. And when you put a balise there, it can pass the balise and then drive on site into the station itself. Then, just to make this clear, I don't want it on that direction, I want it on this direction. When we have the signal, no matter how far down the line that is, maybe it's the next station, you can see, just to visualize it, it will check, or it can view into both platforms, but due to the one-way signal, it will only check for the lower part, and the train will also only go on the lower part, and the upper part is basically ignored. That way, between the left station, for example, and the right station, the area in the middle will always be seen by both signals. So when there's a train from the right side, it will be seen by the left side signal, and then trains from the left have to wait. Same for the other side. When there's a train in the middle of the single track line, the trains coming from the right side have to wait. Now, what do you do when there is a big station, like this one, for example, but it's not through running, it is stopping. It's an end station. So for all of these, we will do the very simple part. How do you signal an end station? It's very, very simple. Relatively close to the first switch, you put in a signal like that. You can, of course, also always just put them like this, for example, so that you have them all side by side. my only tip here is don't have them directly at the platform. You want the train to drive away from the platform and then arrive at the signal. If you have the signal here, for example, and the train stops at the end of the platform, it will already reserve the part behind it, even though it's sitting at the platform. That can lead to issues, so you want to push the signals a little bit further away. Now here as well, I will just do it like this, 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 and this. Here I will go a bit further to the left because we have a switch there. Then, just to make it relatively fast, single tracks. You have two options on single tracks. Option number one is when you have a station somewhere down the line that you can put in a signal here. We have there right-hand drive again. If it's left-hand drive, you just have to switch it. But we have trains coming from this station, passing the signal, checking if everything in between is clear, and then go. From the other direction, all of these four signals, let's choose the one in the middle, will all nearly see the identical thing. They will check all the way to the next signal and the lower part of the track. And when there's no train coming from the right side, they will always go. Of course, what you can also do is put another signal in there. Then you only run into the issue that this signal can't reserve the area that the switches are. You can see it here, there's no pink line because it ends at the signal. That can be quite an issue. And what you then can do, no, always doesn't change anything about it. Yeah, so putting a signal here is only intelligent when you have two trains going in. But then again, you would also need a balise here, and that is quite dangerous to have a balise on single track lines. Now down here, it's very simple. We have a double line, we have basically main line, and there you want to check where the switches are ending. I did a little bit of a weird setup here with the switches, and there it's super simple. You want to put the signal inbound quite far away, but close to the first switch, and the outbound balise there as well. Then here you can see that the entire area in between the signals, even behind the signals, can be read, so the trains entering the stations will pass it. If there's a train waiting there and blocking the platform, it will wait out here. And then here the trains departing from the platforms have a view all the way to the balise, or if they interfere with other trains approaching, the signal will reserve it. Now down here, if you have situations like these, you have two options. So we have a main line here, we have a second main line up here. How do you want to treat this area in the middle? There are two options. Option number one is you treat this as a main line as well. That has the pro reason that you can put in one-way balises. But now if you come in and you put in balises because you want to keep the main line unregulated and then put in a signal here and here, you see the distance is quite short. What you can also do is just put the signals out here, remove these signals, keep the one-way signals in, and that way there won't be that much of a mix-up, but you have a huge area that will be reserved every time a train passes by, or that is potentially reserved if a train passes by. So it is always a decision on your part how much of the junction you want to signal. And my big tip is whenever you have a double track main line, just put in a balise. Don't care about the main line itself. Don't try to set up block signals. It is not really worth it. It can be, but not really. So this is just the way how I would signal all of these things in NIMBY Rails. Now let's go up here. I have set up a beautiful yard because we need to store the trains. How do you signal that? Setup that we have is we have a main line that passes by the yard like this, and we just use this simple tactic. Unregulated mainline, put in a signal there. Here the same, because we have quite a big area in between these junctions. Keep it unregulated and then put in the balises here and here, and voila, we are done. Now when it comes to yards, I want to show you two things. So what is if you have these yards set up as one-way yards, for example? There are quite a few use cases where that can happen. And the reality is you don't have to set them up any differently than the normal parts. Truth is, you can also do the balises in, but you don't have to. The normal way how I would set up any of these is you just do it like a station. So you put in a row of signals. What you can of course do is move them close to the single track up here. And then do the same for the other part. I will only do the first 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That way we have set up the first 5 parts of the cargo yard or train yard, sleeping place, however you want to call it. Just put signals onto both sides. Why is it that easy? When we have trains coming from the left that want to go into the depot, they will have this signal, and this signal you can see is looking into all of the areas. Not in the one that I marked with the one-way signal, but into everything else the signal can look into. So it knows if it wants to go in or out, if this is blocked or not. Then if a train wants to go out, very simple, it goes here, and then it wants to reserve the entire purple part. Of course not against the traffic, but all the way down to this last junction it wants to reserve everything, and it can do that if there is no train coming from the main line. Now, what is if the yard, like these 4 tracks, ends on the left side, or on the right side? Super easy. You don't have to put any signals on this side, but you then just proceed to do this. You just put a signal in front of it. From the right, when a train is coming, here you can see it passes the signal. It can look into all of the platforms of this yard. And then when the trains want to leave again, they just start rolling and then they try to reserve this pink part. And then they see if it's possible or not. If you want to give the trains more priority in 1.17, you just push the mainline signals further back. That way they reserve it a bit earlier and not just super close in front. But yes, that is basically my tips for how to signal. And thank you for watching. I wanted to keep this very informative. I hope it worked. And see you in the next video. If you have any more questions, the Weird and Wry Discord is always a good place to ask. And see you in the next one. Bye bye.